Thank you for watching another one of my videos. Today we're going to do some maintenance on a clutch, and it's pretty bad, so be prepared. This bike, it had a battery leak or even explode and left acid all down the left side of the bike, the left side of the engine and case covers, and that acid ate through the clutch line. Um, the previous owner stopped riding the bike quite some time ago, attempted to bleed the clutch, um, didn't work good for him, um, and you'll see what it's like after a year or more with no clutch fluid. So I'm beating the hell out of this clutch cover. It's pretty well glued on. Um, there's no there's no fluid in this reservoir. Um, I've seen worse. Unfortunately, I have purchased bikes where the clutch reservoir was worse than this. So you can see the diaphragm's completely opened up. When I remove the diaphragm, you can see all the gunk crystallized um, underneath the diaphragm. And inside the reservoir, there's just crystals of what is left of um, clutch fluid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump some new clutch fluid into this reservoir, and it'll help me to suck out those crystals that are down there in the bottom. This is the easier way to do it, is just get everything in there wet and soggy, lubricated, and then just take your mighty vac and suck everything out. So you see all those crystals are gone now. They're in my mighty vac. And now just take a paper towel and wipe all the crud out of the bottom of this reservoir and clean it up. And once we can see black paint again, or black powder coating in the bottom of this reservoir, then we're pretty much good to go. You see how nasty that is? That's a trait of Ducati, that black in the reservoir. I personally think that um, the clutch line might be too close to the hot engine of Ducati, or maybe the clutch line doesn't have enough insulation. I don't really know for sure, but it seems like every Ducati that I've ever owned or worked on has clutch problems. Um, and a lot of that I think is due to the clutch fluid being too close to the engine and just getting burnt from usage. So I'm just pumping some of the crud out of the master. We're going to move on because we can actually fill this reservoir, and any of that crud that's down in the master in the clutch pump part of it, I can pull out of the bottom. I can pull it out from the slave. So I'm taking a 12 millimeter wrench, and I'm going to break this banjo bolt free. So be careful with the banjo bolt. They're hollow. They're not the hardest metal in the world. Um, so be careful breaking this free, because you are going to need to reuse this unless you purchased an aftermarket clutch line. And your aftermarket clutch line will come with new banjo bolts and new crush washers. Do not reuse the crush washers. I can't stress that enough. Sure, it's okay to reuse the crush washer that's on your oil drain plug, but do not reuse the crush washer that's in your brake system. Oil, not so important. Brake system, extremely important if you want to live to see tomorrow, or wake up tomorrow with no pain from crashing and running off the road and going to take a soil sample. So as you can see on this side of the bike, you can see the cooling fins on the motor have some discoloration, and you can see where something has run down the side of the crankcase. Well, that's battery acid. My guess would be at some point in time the battery was on a battery tender, and the battery tender cooked the battery and dumped the battery acid probably out of the breather hose, or maybe it just cracked the battery and forced all the acid out on top of the engine. So right now I've removed the banjo bolt that's holding the bottom of the clutch line, and I'm just going to pull that clutch line out from the engine. Um, so up close and personal, you can see what battery acid does to your clutch line. Your clutch line is stainless steel, so it's not going to hold up very well to battery acid. And then the Teflon inside the clutch line, it's going to get eaten as well. So now let's look at this. This is $21. So don't go out and buy new stuff if you don't need to. I bought the slave cylinder and the clutch line for $21. Now heads up, Ducati slave cylinders and clutch lines are pretty much the same across the board, no matter what bike you have. Also, that little rubber nipple, save that. Make sure you have that. And then these are new crush washers. I buy crush washers 100 at a time. They're about 10 bucks. Well worth it. Back to the clutch line in the slave cylinder. You do not need to use the clutch line and slave cylinder for this bike. One from a Monster will work. One from an 848 will work. One from a 1098 will work. A clutch line is a clutch line is a clutch line for Ducati. So, you know, don't stress if you can't find an 800 SS or 1000 SS clutch line. You can easily get one from another bike and mount it onto this one. Same goes with the slave. The slave pretty much fits, the slave for this bike will pretty much fit any Ducati up into the new Panigale, which are a little bit different slave. So anyway, I'm going to clean off the banjo bolt. You'll make sure that that's very clean. And I'm going to put a new crush washer onto the banjo, and another crush washer on the other side of the banjo, and then I'm going to thread it into place. So I'm going to route this clutch line on the outside of the frame. Typically, Ducati will run the clutch line inside the trellis and up next to the motor, and then through where the triple tree mounts and up to the handlebar. I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to put a few inches between this clutch line and the engine. So that's going to help a little tiny bit, and I mean a little tiny bit. So here we go. You saw me pull it out from inside the trellis, so I'm going to run it behind the coil at the top of the trellis. So I don't have any part of my clutch line that's close to a cylinder anymore. That vertical cylinder puts off a lot of heat, so the running it inside the trellis actually puts that clutch line at least maybe 2.5 inches closer to the cylinder, and I just don't want my clutch line that close. So once I have my clutch line routed, I need to decide how I'm going to mount it up and make sure that everything still turns properly. So here's my banjo bolt, and I'm putting on a brand new crush washer, and you need to be using a brand new crush washer. I can't stress that enough. And then on the inside, I'm going to put another brand new crush washer, and then I'm going to thread this banjo bolt into the master. So do it hand tight, and then move your handlebars and make sure that your clutch line isn't going to get hung up on anything. And then I can't think of anything worse than having my clutch line hang up on something as I'm trying to ride a motorcycle down the road and not be able to turn the bars. So I'm going to put my 12mm wrench on here, and I'm going to tighten this up. And you want to snug this up pretty good. There's really no need to torque it. I'm sure there are torque specifications for this particular job, but you just want to get it very tight. so the crush washer seats into the master, the banjo, and the banjo bolt itself. So once I have everything mounted, I'm going to go ahead and run a zip tie to help hold that clutch line on the far outside of the frame away from that vertical cylinder. So when it runs inside the trellis, you don't really need a zip tie. But again, that clutch line is going to flop around in there, and you never know where it's going to go, how much heat it's absorbing. At least this way, I've got the clutch line away from most of the heat sources. So let's top off our reservoir now. We're going to put .4 in there. The bike probably had .3 when it came from the factory, but I run .4 and everything, so I'm going to put .4 in here. And it's odd because the rear brake is actually labeled for .4, but the front of the bike is labeled for .3. I prefer .4, but if you're doing .4, you need to flush out the system really well with the .4 before you finish up and do a final bleed. Alright, so I'm putting my Mighty Vac together here, and I'm going to attach my Mighty Vac to the bleeder valve, and then I'm going to break free that 8mm bleeder and start pulling .4 through the system. So on this particular model of Ducati, and this goes the same for some of the lower priced monsters, there is not a bleeder valve on the master up by the handlebar. And that's unfortunate because that means you really have to bleed the bottom well. So if you have issues to where you're pulling fluid through your system but you're not getting any clutch feel up top, try pumping the clutch lever a couple times, and sometimes it'll release some air here and there, and you'll start getting more fluid down at the bottom, and the clutch feel will come back very quickly until you have full force on the clutch. If I knew for sure that I was going to keep this bike forever, and I don't know that yet, I would probably replace my master cylinder up top with the master cylinder off of a 848 or a 1098.
You got mail.
So that can actually be purchased pretty cheaply on eBay. So you know, keep an eye open if you want to change up your master. The Superbike clutch master will work fine, and it might even make the bike look a little sportier. But as you see, I'm pulling a lot of dirty fluid out of the system. Even though the system looked pretty dry, my clean fluid is kind of breaking loose all that junk that's in the master and pulling it down the line. I will more than likely change out my clutch fluid again in about a month, just so I can make sure that I get just absolute clean, clear clutch fluid in my bike and working properly. So what I'm really doing is just pumping it up to about 15 psi, and then I break the bleeder and let it go down to about 5 psi, and then close the bleeder. And this guarantees that no air is going to get back up into the system. It's a little time consuming. In the video it actually makes it look pretty quick, but I spent a lot of time doing this to get my clutch feel the way I wanted it, and as much clean fluid through the system as I could. So I just emptied out my Mighty Vac, and I'm pumping fluid through again. And I didn't show it, but throughout the video, even though I'm pumping, I have stopped and refilled the reservoir several times. That's the only way you're going to flush all of the old dark brown brake fluid out of your clutch. So once you're pumping on your Mighty Vac and your little tank on the Mighty Vac starts having clean brake fluid in it, then you're pretty much done with this project and you can stop anytime. And then just grab a hold of your lever and make sure it has the feel that you want it to have. For me right now with the stock levers, the clutch pull feels pretty good. I'm happy with it the way it is. I do have adjustable levers coming, so I'm not too worried about it because I can't ride the bike until I replace the belts. The belts haven't gotten here yet. So I'm topping off the reservoir one more time. And let's pull a little bit more fluid through. I can only imagine how bad this job would be if I didn't have a Mighty Vac. The Mighty Vac vacuum pump might be one of the best tools ever made, and I say that in every one of my videos where I'm using one. It's just a good tool. It's worth every penny of that 40 bucks that Mighty Vac cost. So at this point, we're pretty much done running fluid through. Now, I don't throw away any parts, ever. So I looked in my toolbox and look what I found. I found a brand new reservoir cap and the diaphragm for a Ducati. So I remember buying this several years ago, and I bought it for a Monster 900, a 1996 Monster 900. And here it is on a 2007 model year bike, and it's still the same part. So when I tell you that there's so many interchangeable parts on a Ducati, you need to believe me. Because I'm about to put a part made for a 1996 M900 onto a 2007 800 Super Sport. And I'm glad I found this, because that one that I pulled off of here is just really nasty, and all the cleaning in the world wasn't going to make me happy driving down the road looking at the discolored cover to this master cylinder. So now I get to ride down the road and look at one that looks almost brand new, and I'm very happy, extremely happy about that. I have a new cover, I have brand new screws. The screws aren't boogered up from the last owner, so good times all around. So just in this video alone, I've shown you 2 used parts that came off other Ducatis that fit perfectly on this Ducati. I'm going to show you one more before the video's over. This is one and that one will be a part that I was going to paint on this bike, but when I found the cover to this clutch reservoir, I also found that part in the toolbox, and I was kind of giddy about finding that one, so we'll get to that in a few minutes. So look how much clutch pull I have. I am happy to have that much clutch pull. Alright, now we're going to service our slave. We're going to put our dust cover on the banjo first. If you don't have a cover for that bleeder nipple, you need to take some duct tape or something and put it over that hole, so you're not leaking or you're not getting dirt into that bleeder nipple. Just a heads up, you do not want to be riding down the highway without that bleeder nipple protected. So what I'm doing now is I'm removing the 3 screws which hold our slave cylinder onto the side of the bike. And the reason I'm doing that is I just want to make sure that our push rod and our slave are clean and tidy and everything's okay. There's no oil leaking out of the side of the engine. So here's the slave off the bike. I'm going to put a little WD-40 on it and wipe some of the crud off of the inside. So this crud here is typically just like chain lube or whatever that gets slung up on it. Either way, I just don't want it on the slave. So that looks pretty good. This is the push rod. Your clutch is on the other side of the bike. So this is the push rod. When you grab a handful of clutch, the slave pushes this rod into the clutch plate, the pressure plate on the clutch, and disengage the clutch discs. So there's a little O-ring. On some Ducatis it's pink, on some Ducatis it's green, but we're going to take that O-ring out and clean it up. Put our push rod back in. It looks good. Some of the motor oil that was on the push rod, I went ahead and put it on the outer part of the push rod. And I'm cleaning up the little O-ring and I'm going to stick it back onto the slave. So there's 3 O-rings. There's 2 O-rings that are on the push rod and then this O-ring. And their purpose is to keep dirt and debris out of the engine and engine oil from seeping out of the side of the bike. Alright, so here's the third part. So in my chain video, I said I was going to clean this countershaft sprocket cover up and paint it black. And I was thinking about doing that, and then I opened up my toolbox and I found the black countershaft sprocket cover off of my 2008 Ducati 848. So really happy about that. I replaced this with a $30 carbon fiber piece on my 848, which left me a perfectly good black countershaft sprocket cover, and it's even got the Ducati logo on it. So, you know, it's an official Ducati part. I'm really happy. So spray some WD-40 on it, clean it up a little bit, and it's going to be a nice addition to this 800 SS. Every day that I work on this 800 SS, I smile a little bit more. Right now I am 1 week into the rebuild. I bought this bike on New Year's Day, and today is January 8th that this video was done. So I'm really happy. I figure by the end of the week I should have my timing belts. The timing belts that are on this bike are original. This bike has 8,000 miles on it. Original timing belts. So I really don't want to ride on 12-year-old timing belts. Then all the money that I put into this bike will be wasted if one of those belts goes south on me, and you know, I throw away the engine. So I don't want to do that. So this black countershaft sprocket, it already makes the bike look better. Now if I could just do something about where the battery acid dripped on the tank, and I might get some ceramic paint or something and paint these case covers. I just haven't decided yet on that. I'll know more about that once I ride the bike. If I ride the bike and I decide that I really like the bike and the way it rides, and I'm going to keep it for a while, then I'll probably do something to pretty up those case covers, that case cover. Until then, my mindset will be the next owner can worry about it. So I'm going to put the slave back on now. We're almost done with this video. So I'm just cleaning up the funk on the slave. I hit it with some steel wool just to clean it up a little bit more. And make sure that you have that little O-ring on your slave when you stick it back on the push rod. That will keep all the dirt and debris from the chain that the chain slings up from getting between your slave and into the push rod area. So here's my first little screw going back into place. Just do these finger tight and then come back and tighten all three of them down at once. And there was some corrosion from sitting that those gold anodized bolts that Ducati uses. If you're not cleaning the bike regularly, those bolts get corrosion on them really easy. This bike sat for a long extended period of time in a moist environment, so a lot of those anodized bolts were corroded. A little bit of WD-40 and some steel wool makes them look okay. Not like new, but okay, just okay. So with the last screw in place, we'll go ahead and we'll tighten down all three of these screws. It doesn't take a lot of torque. You don't have to manhandle this. Just get them tight. They won't pop off. One last final wipe on this countershaft sprocket cover, and yeah, we're just about good to go on this project. So if your clutch doesn't have the feel you want when you grab it, this is a trick I learned from a friend of mine. His name's Regan Shaw. He was hit by a motorist on his motorcycle. He was at a red light. Some guy rear-ended him, killed him. But if you zip tie your clutch and your brake, it'll force all the air out of your system, and the feel of those levers will be just amazing when you're out there riding. Thanks for watching my video. I hope it was helpful for you, and check out some of my other stuff.